what if I just figured something out about myself on your show?
I love it.
You're such a good host.
I'm taking this to my therapy this week. Author of Seven Thompson and the Art of Remembering. Please welcome back to the Zoom, Grace Wethor.
That was so weird. That's the first time I've ever heard somebody say that out loud. So
Really?
I'm excited to be here. Yeah.
When did you discover that you were brilliant?
Julia. Oh my goodness.
First of
I'm
all,
already flustered, Julia. I love being on your podcast. It's my favorite.
oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being back. Like we said multiple times in the last vlog, Grace is the first guest back on Behind the Resume. It is such an honor to have you here. Thank you for being here. I adore you, as we know. So I'm just very happy to be talking to you today.
Well, I'm excited to be back. It's my honor.
Well, we have so much to talk about. The day that this episode is posted, your book is now out in the world. So first, where can people get the book?
Wow, that's terrifying to think about that. Okay. It'll be available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and some independent retailers as well, but Amazon's usually the fastest way to get it.
What would you say the book's about?
It's about a boy who goes through this kind of traumatic event. We don't really know exactly what happened to him, but he finds himself on the edge of a bridge, and he suddenly realizes that he doesn't know who he is. He can't remember how he got there. He doesn't remember anything of his personal memories. And so he goes on this adventure, this journey to try to figure out who he is. And he has these friends that help him and support him along the way. But it's there's a lot of ups and downs throughout it. So it's kind of a conversation about, mental health, but also kind of what would the world look like if we didn't have any context. There's a little story, I guess, behind this. I started doing this thing probably during quarantine where I started taking pictures of like really random things. Like my friends were like, we cannot stop to take another picture of like a sidewalk crack, Grace. Like this needs to end. And I was taking pictures of literally everything. I was taking pictures of like trash and like literally anything you could think of. And it was just so fun because it felt like a little way to like practice gratitude. And like the other day I spilled a cup of like dirty paint water, and my first thought instead of being like, oh my God, I spilled water, it was like, I have to take a picture of that. And I fell in love with this concept of seeing beauty in things that usually frustrate us, or we see them as very mundane things. So I think the entire book is really asking the question, what would happen if we had no context? How could we see beauty in the world if we looked at something with no resistance, and just only love? I thought this juxtaposition was really interesting because we have a character here who was at his lowest point in his life in the beginning, and all of a sudden he has just nothing. He's empty. So how can he rebuild his world, and what would that look like if he had no background and no preconceived ideas of good or bad?
And I'm not just saying this, like if there was a word that was beyond brilliant, it would be that.
Julia!
No, I mean it. I also realized when I was reading the book that I've never read a book written by a friend before.
That's crazy.
And so when I was reading it, I was like, this came out of Grace. Like this world you created.
Yeah.
When did you first have the idea for this concept?
It came to me in a couple different waves. I had different concepts that I wanted to play with for a long time, but it took a while for the characters to kind of create themselves. And once they did, it was super easy. Like you were saying, it's like it's an entire world. And this is my first public work of fiction. I've done this kind of on my own just for fun before. But the realization that I was creating an entire world that people were going to be able to dive into was like something that I did not take lightly. I was like, I need everyone to be fully fleshed out and have their own things in their own lives. But the idea of the amnesia I had probably for like 3 or 4 years. I knew I wanted to do something with it. I didn't know what that character would look like. I didn't know, originally I definitely thought I was going to write it from the perspective of a girl, and then I switched it to a teen boy. So this idea of losing your memories through a traumatic event I had had for a couple of years. And then I remember I was in a car in Montana driving up a mountain on my way to go ski. And I was just sitting there thinking, and it was so beautiful. And it was like in the forest, and I had my headphones in. And I remember I was thinking about experience I had on the airplane on the way there. And I came up with this concept of giving stories, which was really this whole idea of what if our purpose on earth isn't to collect stories for ourselves and collect memories for ourselves, but to give them to other people? What if we lived our lives trying to give other people good memories, trying to give other people good stories that they could tell? And that is kind of sprinkled throughout the book. And that was kind of the first time that I had an actual idea that I knew I wanted to write about in the book. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. And then I spent like a year kind of developing those 7 things and what they were going to be. And then once I started writing the book, it was already there.
How many years ago was it like the first idea?
Oh gosh. Probably the beginning of quarantine.
Wow.
But the actual book, 7 Thompson and the Art of Remembering, I think was born about almost 2 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what did make you want to write from a boy's perspective?
I had just never done it before. I also thought that it worked well for this because he's looking at this perspective of this girl, Lucy. And I knew that I wanted my main character to kind of be this like glowing yellow ball of sunshine. And it's really weird. Is like, yes, 7 is the main character, but it's all about Lucy in a way. We follow her journey and we follow her path, and the ending is about her, and it's really her story. And there's so much of Lucy that I want to be in the world, and I think everyone wants to be in the world, and I think there's pieces of all of us in her as well. So it was kind of like, if you were making a movie, you would probably assume that like Lucy would be the main character. And I thought writing from the perspective of a teen boy would be, 1, a challenge, but 2, I thought it would kind of like celebrate this mundaneness of his life and then how spectacular he can make it be when he loses all his memories. So yeah, it just felt right to do it that way.
Did you have to like go people watch boys or study boys in the wild?
It was helpful because he has no memories. So she's his only influence. So his perspective is very female of the world. Like he speaks very poetically and very like in a feminine way, which also was really fun to play with too, because he has no background. You know, he doesn't remember anything else. So yeah, I there's bits of different personalities in all the characters, but he's kind of influenced by all of them in a way.
Say you receive this screenplay and you see the character of Lucy. Would that be like a dream role?
Yes, I will play Lucy, you guys.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, no, I'll take it.
Do you have anyone in mind that you'd want to play 7?
Oh gosh, we've actually had this conversation a couple times. I don't think I've seen them yet. I remember I watched Looking for Alaska, and I felt that the dynamic between Charlie Plummer and Kristen Froseth was very similar to how I felt that 7 and Lucy would be. So maybe Charlie would be an interesting take on it. But it's weird. It's like all these characters are in my head, but I can't like fully see their faces. They're like outlines of themselves. And I hope that I kind of leave it that way for the readers as well. I hope they can kind of create their own versions of these characters or see themselves in these characters in a way. So the details are very interesting. It's so much more in this book about like the feeling of the room or the environment or the temperature or the air, and kind of less about the actual characters themselves. So hopefully people can kind of inject themselves into the world and feel as if they're living the story. Even in the book, I speak to the reader in a way sometimes, to them directly. So I hope people can kind of feel like enthralled and engaged in the story in that way.
There will be spoilers. So if you haven't read the book yet, literally, what are you doing? Run to Barnes and Noble. But we are going to be talking about I have so many questions about the ending and about different things. So if you don't want spoilers, make sure to read the book first. With that being said, every sentence is poetry in this book.
Thanks.
And it reminds me of Hamilton in the way that like you read the lyrics of a song and every sentence makes you think and feel, and you're just like, how is it this brilliant with every word? And that's what this book is. And I really, really mean that. And when I finished reading it, I truly was like, I want to write a song. I want to write a book. I was so inspired, not just obviously by you, but also by the story and the messages from it and how it made me think about this human experience. and how sometimes, like you say in the book, how small we feel and irrelevant, but how much of a miracle it is that we are here in this moment.
Yeah.
What about your personal life inspired you to share that message?
I'm so glad that you caught that, because by you asking me that question means that you caught it, which is like good, because although this book is fiction, there is so much about my perspective of the world that I've gained through my background. For those of you who don't know, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor when I was 13, and I was told I had about 6 months to live because of this tumor in this area of the brain being really difficult to treat. And so I moved to LA shortly after and began pursuing my dreams and living full force and kind of treating every day as if it may be my last, because I didn't know when that would be. And it's been 5 years since I released my first book, which was nonfiction, and it was about my brain tumor experience. But this book is just as much about the brain tumors experience as the last one was. I think there's my perspective that I've gained because of my outlook on the world and because of this, life sentence that I've been given. And so the book really is about celebrating the fact that we are alive and we have the ability to shape the world that we want and create our own truths and live how we want to live and surround ourselves with people who love us and choose to learn to forgive the world and love the world and just all of that, blah, blah, blah. It is so much about this unique perspective that I think a lot of cancer survivors and people who have been through different terminal illnesses or traumatic events kind of gain on the world. So I'm glad that you caught that perspective, because really that's what I want to inject into all of my work and into all of my writing is humanity and the experience of being a human, which I think is something I've had to grapple with a lot, being told that you're going to die at a very young age and then living, which is sometimes even harder than the first half of that experience. So yeah, I think the book, although it's about this story and about these characters, it's so much just about the experience of the world and our universe.
These characters, and again, spoilers, but you find out that they met in a mental institution. Is that the correct way to put it?
Yeah.
And obviously at the beginning of the book, Seven is trying to take his life, correct?
Yeah.
Yet, as a reader, I felt that the message that the book was giving was one of the ultimate celebration of life.
Yeah.
And maybe those characters had to be at those lows to then appreciate the highs.
Absolutely.
Also took away the idea that you are all of your experiences combined, right? Like that's what makes us who we are. But also remembering that with each day we choose the person that we're going to become.
Yeah.
How sometimes we feel that we are already defined, but we are still writing our story every day. I don't know. That's kind of what I took away from it. Was that the intention?
Yeah. Thank you for putting that so beautifully. I think it is really interesting. As you were saying that, I was kind of thinking about, my past. I was told that I was defined by this percentage or by this diagnosis. And I had to choose in my personal life to not live that. I had the option to stay in the hospital and just sit there, even though they couldn't help me. And I decided to leave, even though it was scary to do at the time. I decided to move away and leave the hospital and leave the doctors and kind of leave that life behind, even though I was very much in the middle of it. And I think there's something very interesting about the similarities between me and Seven is like, he knows he was on this bridge, but he doesn't know why. And he doesn't have that context. And that's not how he feels all of the time now, especially when he doesn't have any personal memories. So it's kind of like, how are we defined by these things that are written as facts in our life, but we may not necessarily take on as our own or identify with? There's so many things that we're just born with, and then that becomes our identity. But I think there's so much of this aspect of life of creating who we want to be and becoming the people that we want to grow into. So as you were saying that, I think it's really interesting how accidental, but definitely probably on purpose and somewhere in my mind, his experiences with my own. But yeah, no, I think all of them, and also kind of this idea of what community can do as well. We see these friends as this support for him throughout the book, but we realize towards the end that they're struggling as well. And we don't see that. And, I have gone through this idea, and a lot of my work is like seeing the unseen all around us. I don't look like someone you think is fighting a brain tumor, but there's symptoms and there's side effects every single day. when you have no context and you have no memories and you have no background, it's really easy just to look at the world with one perspective or through one lens. He looks at all of his friends in this way and makes definitive decisions about who they are, but he doesn't know that they're all going through the same thing as him. And obviously they can't tell him as well because, of his whole memory issues. But it's, really this hope that people can look around at the world around them and be like, everyone is going through something, whether they choose to share it or not. And I think these characters, if you read it a second time, you go through and you see those little bits of it throughout the book. And you see those little peek throughs of the things that they're going through. And I think there's a line when we find out that they all met there, and Lucy says something like, your need for me to be okay was your only thing bigger than your need for yourself not to be. So like she was his reason for continuing on, even when he was at his lowest. So yeah, kind of this idea of community and building up the people around you as well.
Has writing this book taught you anything about yourself?
There's so much more of me in it than I thought there was going to be. And I've heard that from people who are really close to me who have read it. But just kind of the perspective of the world, like you said, this idea of like, we're all so small and the world is so big and the universe is so big. And because of that, I think in the book, it was like, because literally nothing matters, that means that everything does.
Yeah.
We're the ones who give our universe meaning because we matter to each other, because we are literally on like a tiny floating rock. So if you think of it in that way, nothing matters, so everything does. So I thought that was kind of like, it's like a good reminder for me to like just do the things that I want to do and pursue the things I want to pursue, because we are just on a speck of dust. I think what do I call it in the book? I think it's like a speck of dust in the timeline of coincidence or something overly poetic like that. But yeah, just living as full as you can, because you don't know how long you have.
How different is this final draft from the first?
I think it didn't change too much because I had it really fleshed out before. I knew where the characters were going, I knew what they were doing, and I knew the activities before I even started writing the book. So once I started writing the book, it kind of flowed out of me pretty freely. The last 5-ish chapters kind of got flipped around a lot. I pushed Lucy's involvement more, and I fleshed out a couple of the other character stories as well. So I think the end got strengthened as well. But yeah, it's pretty similar overall to where we started when I first wrote it.
The senior home scene, if you will.
Yeah, that is one that was not in the first draft.
Really?
So that chapter did not exist in the first draft at all. Yeah, that is the only chapter that was completely added and completely new after the first
How did
draft.
that get added?
I felt like I just needed to like wrap things up with kind of like a mentor perspective.
Yeah.
7 is still a mess, in the last chapter, he still doesn't have his memories back. And so it was kind of like, how can I give people this lesson or this conclusion from the perspective of somebody else, and not through this character that's still obviously going through major struggles. So it just felt like I needed something there, and I knew I wanted to do it through a new character that hadn't been there before.
It also is a reminder that people who are older have a lot of wisdom and life experiences to share. And I love that you brought in that older character versus like another one of his friends. I know this is a big question, but what was the process of writing this book? Like, was it first character development, or did you take any classes? Like, how did you even know how to structure the story so it flows perfectly?
Julia, it was a stab in the dark. So I'm so glad that you think that. I was scared I was going to have to like rework the entire thing after I wrote it. But I think what was really special, I was listening to a lot of different like podcasts of people who had written scripts. I obviously to myself had originally thought of this as a movie. And I think I wrote it like a movie as well. I think it reads a lot like a screenplay, kind of in book format. But I was listening to a lot of podcasts of writers and directors of movies. And I remember like listening to Tarantino interviews and Greta Gerwig interviews, and they had all kind of written or spoken about this process of characters kind of just taking on lives of their own and doing what they wanted to do. And I was like, what are they talking about? That makes no sense. But with this one, I really feel like I did all the prep that I could. I had like a 30-40 page Word document that had just like random things I was kind of spewing that I knew would go in different sections, like little moments I wanted. Just sometimes it was literally just straight up words that I was like copying and pasting into the book. And I had kind of this outline of the things that they were going to do and what each chapter was going to be. And for all of that prep that I did, I made so many more amazing discoveries while I was actually just writing, because I found the characters learned themselves so much throughout the book. Like by the middle and the end, I was like, oh, she would do that. Oh no, she wouldn't do that. Or he would definitely do that. Or they need to do this. And so I almost had to go back and like strengthen them in the beginning. I've written a couple other fiction books that I haven't published yet, and I found that was the truth with those as well. Like I would look at the beginning and I would be like saying things that were very wishy-washy, and I was like, no, I know this character extremely well now. She would not be wishy-washy. She would be mean, or she would be nice, or she would be very confident about this. So I almost like have to go back to the beginning of the book and strengthen these things that I know by the end. So yeah, there was a mix of formatting and then kind of letting the story take over and let the characters take over on their own. And I didn't necessarily have the full background of Ethan's story as I started writing the book. I knew his dad's story and everything, but that for me was the hardest one. The story that we kind of go through in the courthouse scene. I didn't know. I actually think I wrote that chapter last. I ended up writing the book out of order because I knew so clearly where I wanted the book to end, but I didn't know where I wanted some of these side character stories to end necessarily. So kind of you learn them along the way, and then you have to go backwards and work back through it.
That is very interesting. I mean, this is a huge creative endeavor
Yeah.
to take on. So was there writer's block along the way?
No, thank God. I had written so much before that by the time I was actually sitting and writing the book in like book format, I could go on my notes app on my phone and I'd have like at least a page or like a Word doc page of things for that chapter. So I was kind of lucky in that way that I was coming up with random things like in the shower, or like on a walk, or things like that for a couple months before I even started. I was pretty confident that I had a lot happening and a lot going before I even started writing. I remember being a little bit scared to like start because I knew once I started, I was starting. But once I started, I was trying to hit like a certain page count per day. And obviously there's some days there I didn't write anything, but yeah, no, I think the only thing that I really struggled with was obviously I think I strengthened the end, and that took a little bit of time, and then like the side characters like Ethan and Kaizen's stories as well, it just works out. Like I would just, whenever I didn't know exactly what I was doing, I just wouldn't write, and then I would just go live and something would come so fast. Like I swear I just was looking for the perfect things and I would find them so quickly. And then I would just go back and write some more. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you pick the name Lucy?
I actually don't know. It stuck for a while. It was Luci for a while, and then I decided that was annoying because I didn't know what I meant. And then I changed back to Lucy. But I think she was just always Lucy.
What about the other? I mean, I know that Kaizen, his name is explained, but what about Ethan?
It just sounded like a good boat dude name. I don't know. It stuck. I also tried to change his name as well. I actually have like a list of names in my phone for that character. There's like Sutton and like it's a list of like 10, 15 things. And I kept trying to change it, but it had been there for such a long time. And then Kaizen's name was something else originally too. I don't know what it was. I can't remember what it was. It was something with a G or something like that. But yeah, I ended up changing that to Kaizen as well. And I think it worked really well for his story. And I fell in love with kind of this concept of getting 1% better each day, because Kaizen is kind of this silent character. He's this presence of like calmness that we don't see in a lot of the other characters in this book. And he just is more observational. I think all of these characters are pieces of myself and hopefully pieces of the reader and pieces of Seven in a way too. And so having him feel so calm and simple and in the background, but knowing that in a way, his name and what he represents is the whole point of the book, you know, to be 1% better each day and to continue moving forward, even when we don't want to, even when we're scared. So he's kind of like this middle ground. And obviously he's been through so much too, and he was dealing with his own things, but he's kind of like the calm piece of Seven and of hopefully the reader's mind as well. So yeah.
What art, whether it was a film or a music, or what art inspired you for this story?
For me, it was really music. I listened to like a lot of old things from the 90s. I think the book was originally going to be set a little bit earlier. I ended up moving it up to 2007, so like a couple more things would make sense, but I was listening to like old Nirvana stuff and old Bob Dylan and just like all of these really like older records that really just like made me feel like coming of age. There's no other way to explain it. Like the whole book to me is like the color dark green, and it just feels very like warm and like crispy and like foresty in a way, even though they're not in a forest. I went to the forest a lot while working on this book. But for me, music was just so important. I constantly had my headphones in. I had a playlist of songs from Lucy 2-7. It's like a little 4-7 playlist, and it's all of these different songs, and I would listen to that all the time. And obviously there's the soundtrack in the book, which I think are these songs that kind of capture the essence of each chapter. And most of those are songs that I were on this original playlist that I was listening to while I was writing. Like I was saying, is I kind of wrote it like a movie. And so for me, I was constantly trying to place myself into the film version of the book and see what these characters would do and kind of like visualize them in these different situations. So music was what got me there, I think, most of the time. And then I have like smaller playlists that are like for each individual character. So some of them are like rap that was not even out in 2007, but like you're like, this character would definitely listen to this. So yeah, for me, music was a really big piece of discovering these characters and then just getting in the feeling of the book and knowing, you know, how can I carry that aesthetic and that feeling throughout the whole book? I had like a really difficult time with like the chapter where they go to Yale, because I knew that it didn't match the aesthetic completely of what I was doing. And so it just felt odd for a little bit. And a friend of mine was talking to me about it, and they were like, oh, well, just make sure that you bring the aesthetic of the characters into this new environment. And they then create the aesthetic for that world. And so they can be in an environment that doesn't feel like their own, but it still feels like theirs because they're there. And I was like, you're right. Okay, I can do this. And so I was really listening to these, you know, different soundtracks and these different playlists when they started journeying outside of their own worlds to try to bring them into these new communities and these new locations that they were entering. So,
well, I did want to talk about music because throughout the book, there are all these different songs, and I didn't know exactly what it meant. So what we were saying was that each song represents what they were going through. Is that it?
A lot of the words align, but it's more just vibes. Like, that's like, I guess that would be, if this was a movie, that is the song that would be playing in the background. I guess that's how you could look at that. So for me, I'm constantly being like transported by music, and I always have headphones in like literally 24 hours a day. And so, yeah, the songs, you don't have to listen to them, but I have a playlist of them in that order. And I feel like if you listen to the playlist, you get the same highs and lows that you get in the book. So it's kind of like that pattern of their journeys through sound in a way.
That is so fascinating. So do you recommend while someone's reading the book, when they see the song, they then stop and listen to the song and come back?
You can do whatever you want. I understand that reading with music that has words is very difficult. I've had some people that do that, some people that don't. But I guess you could almost think of it as like you're collecting them along the way. Like if you want to just like add them or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, it just felt like they were little kind of like trinkets that I was leaving throughout, and little clues. And I also kind of thought of like maybe Seven was listening to this while this was happening. What would be playing in his headphones while he was in this environment too. So if anything, it's more like his playlist that's playing through the book and through his mind at the same time.
The book starts off and Seven is suicidal, right? And then throughout the story, how exactly does he lose his memory?
Yeah. So so basically there's this thing called dissociative amnesia, and it's like I think it's 0.2% of the population experience it. But basically when people go through a traumatic event, sometimes their brain just resets in order to kind of get rid of that experience and get rid of that memory. I've seen it a lot in people who have gone through things like brain tumors or like cancer or like traumatic events like that. They'll kind of be like, I don't really remember that year in the hospital, or I don't remember my diagnosis or whatever. But I had heard of a couple stories and met a couple people who had been in a really bad mental state. And every time they tried to act upon that, they would just like forget everything. And I was so fascinated about this concept of like our brain knowing what we need even more than we do in a way. Like our brain is so complicated, and we will never fully understand the human brain. And I think I was just so fascinated by all of this because I knew that I was going through my own things, and there's so many things happening in my brain that I literally don't even know what's going on in there. And so I met with so many like neurologists because of my brain tumor background, and just talking to them about memory and about the different parts of our brain. So basically he's just pushed to this point of trauma that his brain just resets. And it sounds crazy, but it is something that happens. I know many people that it's like happened to. I've heard of many cases. I've read so many things about it. So yeah, it can be kind of any traumatic event. And his was kind of getting to this mental health space where he literally just his body reset and he had to start over.
The Lucy character is so beautifully written. And like you were saying before, I really feel like, at least as a reader, I was able to think of people that I know as these different characters, or like you were saying, how all these characters are different parts of yourself.
Yeah.
I felt there was so much room for imagination, and you can just apply these characters in the story to your own life. But the way that Seven describes this Lucy character, of course it's romantic, but it's like more than that. It's like a higher level than just a crush. And it's so beautiful the way that you said before how that character is kind of who you aspire to be. Do you feel that Lucy is like a higher self version of yourself?
I think there's definitely pieces of her in there. I think there's something so special about her, and you're right. I kind of depict her in this way as like a god, like she's kind of this magical being. And it's almost religious at times. And I screenshotted a thing from the book that I'll just read because I thought this was so wonderful, and it goes back to that idea of like looking at the world with no context and how things can be beautiful if we just choose to look at them with love. He's basically talking to her, and this is the scene in the bathroom for people who have read it, but she looks up at me, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. Anything can be beautiful when you look at it without context. She turns sharply and throws away the crumpled stack of paper towels. And you, my dear, you have lost your context. Any pile, object, or mess on earth can be beautiful if you look at it with love. If you look at it with no resistance, no history. But when I go to sleep at night, I'm just a human. I'm just a body. I'm not a god. I'm just a girl. And for the first time, as she seals band-aids to my fingers, I see her bloody nails and grown-out hair. She's clinging to gravity almost as much as I am, and I've done nothing but drown her in gold. But even still, with her dust and cracks, I love her, maybe even more so. So I think for me, it was like, she's not this perfect thing. She is going through all of these things too. You know, I think there's a line in the end that's like, we were seeking the same peace 5 feet away from each other, and I was too selfish to ever notice. I like that she's portrayed as this like perfect, bubbly, whatever, but at the end of the day, she's in her brain too. So we're all living in our own brains, and we've never been anybody else. And it's such a weird experience to know that everyone else is a full human too. And so I feel like she kind of captures that message in a way of like, everyone is a full person. Everyone is living their own lives fully, and we're just observers of their story in a way. And so he kind of uses her as the epicenter of his world, but she's her own main character in her own head too. And so I love that she is kind of this unobtainable thing throughout. And then as he starts looking at the world around him and becoming more of a person and remembering more and learning more and collecting more stories, he realizes that there's more to her too. You know, she's just a girl. She's not a god. And so she starts becoming more human throughout the rest of the book. And she starts being described a little bit more mundane, and some of that goes away, but that love is still there that he found throughout. So she can be a human and this magical entity at the same time.
Lucy, when I was reading the book, I didn't see a face. I saw light. I saw this just this energy. And I think that's what's special about reading a book versus seeing a film. I think that everybody can relate to that feeling of looking at somebody else and only seeing in a positive way what you want to see, right? And then what you just read of, like, when he started to see the human parts of her, it only made him love her more, which I think is beautiful. Because you could have taken it the other way of, oh, now I'm realizing that she's human and she's not this god. But it goes back to the theme of just finding the beauty in everything in life.
Towards the end of the book, you know, when they're fighting, she's that reminder of everything that he's not. And I think that is where that kind of creeps in more. And then the realization at the end that they can complement each other. He doesn't have to be her. He doesn't have to be this thing that he feels is unobtainable. They can complement each other and exist kind of on that even playing field in that way too. With the old folks home and the conversation about the star and the astronomer.
Seven doesn't feel that he is this light that Lucy is, right? Mm-hmm. And he doesn't feel that he necessarily has as much to offer as she does. He can help shine Lucy's light instead of feel that he doesn't have light of his own. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure I can find that part. Especially for young people, I think this book is kind of geared towards coming of age space and, you know, young adults. And I think a lot of teens will probably read it. And that idea of like figuring out your place in the world is so hard and so scary. And like, you're just surrounded by the people that you've always been surrounded with. You know, you're kind of thrown into this life and you go to the school you go to, probably not by your own choice. And you know, grow up around these people who just become your friends because they're next to you. And I think it's really scary as you get older to realize that you can be your own person, separate from where you came from, separate from how you grew up. And finding your place on the earth is such a large task, and finding how your skills can be celebrated. You know, everybody has skills, and what that looks like can be different for every person, especially now with like social media and just like the way the world is changing so much. I think there's so many opportunities to use your gifts and use your skills in different ways and make that a career or make that a hobby if you don't want that to be a career. Like, your options are limitless. And so that gets very overwhelming. I feel like I feel very grateful that I kind of knew what I wanted to do from a very young age. But yeah, this conversation of Seven, actually, I'm sure I have it right here, but he has the conversation with, you know, the guy in the old folks home, Mr. Matthews, and kind of about what his place on earth is, because he never feels like he's enough. He feels like he's kind of holding the people in his life back. He is going through these struggles. He can't remember things, and he kind of feels like he's weighing everybody down. Her presence reminds me of everything I'm not. She's everything I'm not. I don't want to be bad. I don't want to be loved despite. I want to be loved because. I know that I can be good. I cry for books and plants and the sun and music. I love the most desperate love I've ever read of, and I live what I wish I had read. I see magic in everything, even when there's no magic there. So that's kind of like his looking at Lucy, even when they're all going through things. And then, well, then that's your purpose. Huh? We all have a purpose. Stop trying to be something you're not. You may not be a star, but who said that being an astronomer isn't just as valuable? Someone has to cheer on the stars.
That's exactly what I was referring to.
Yeah. So kind of, you know, finding his own place in the world and how he can lend this beauty and this outlook that he has on the world around him because he has no background. You know, he's taking this thing that was seen as so terrible and the struggle that he's going through and making it into a superpower. You know, I look at like my brain tumor experience and most people are like, that is so horrible. And I'm like, no, that's like the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to live the life that I always should have been living. It was like this boost that I needed to get rid of fear of pursuing things that I wanted to pursue. And I think in a way through this chapter at the old folks home, that's what Seven is realizing. It's that this struggle that he's going through isn't weighing him down and holding him back. He just needs to look at his purpose and his place in the world a little bit differently. So he's the one that can kind of lend the magic to those situations when others are doing their things as well.
You say get rid of fear. Do you truly have no fear, or do you know how to
I
feel
do.
fear and then keep going?
Yeah, you have the fear and then you keep going. I had been through this thing that put into perspective how short life really can be, as cliche as that sounds. And so the fear of these other things was diminished very quickly. So the fear of failing at trying something seemed so insignificant compared to the fear of like not being able to live as much as I want to live before I die. So the idea of not being able to get everything done in time was just such a bigger piece of my mind than any fear of little things ever was. So I was like, you might as well try. And my mom was always like, every day's an adventure. We're just going to give it a try and see where it goes. So it's not that I didn't have fear. It's not that I don't have fear. It's just my want to do it is so much bigger because I have this kind of like perspective of the world now in a way.
And you are using all of your gifts to then inspire others to do the same, which is,
Thanks.
I don't know what more you could do. I mean, that's just, I literally was on a Zoom like right before this with a group of artists and my mentor, and I was talking about you, and I was like, you know, sharing the whole story, and I was talking about how we were going to be talking about your book, and I'm going to be like sending it to everybody once it comes out. My grandma too, she's excited to read it because it's just, I was going to ask what the demographic is, but I truly don't think that there even should be. Nothing in the book is like, I found inappropriate, right? And
Yeah.
I think that at every stage of life, you can take away a different lesson, and maybe people at different ages will just be able to digest a little bit more or recognize different themes. But what do you think is the target demographic?
I think it's like a coming of age space. So like teens, young adult. But I agree. I think that there's something in there for everybody because, you know, for me, the message is this kind of like point of life overview. Not to say that I know the point of life or anything, but try to capture as much of what I've learned in my experiences with thinking about life excessively. There's room for everybody to read it and see a piece of themselves in everyone. I think it made the most sense for me to write these characters at this kind of like 17-year-old age because they didn't know who they were yet and they were kind of in this place. I remember I did an interview a couple years ago and I talked about this kind of concept of like characters who are very young almost get forgiven for not having accomplished much. And so it gives them this freedom to like make mistakes and not necessarily like be doing anything necessarily, like if that makes sense at all. Like I think in Lady Bird, her existence is the story and her growing up is the story. And I think there's something so magical about that. And we can see all of ourselves in these characters that are so mundane. It's like, yes, Wonder Woman is incredible and she's saving the world, but there's something so special about just hanging out with a girl in her bedroom and seeing how complex the human mind can be. Like we all are literally like computer super machines and like we wake up and we live every single day. We have to breathe every single day. So even when we're just sitting alone in our room, what a wonderfully incredible experience it is just to be alive. And I talk about that in there a little bit too.
That's probably why Lady Bird was so successful. Nothing like out of the ordinary happens in that movie, and everyone can relate to those feelings of just growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like this book, this might not make sense, but it was almost like a zoom out by zooming in to these characters and their situation and their lives, but it helped me as a reader zoom out of my own life and take these lessons and really, I mean, I truly feel like since finishing the book yesterday, I've been applying what I've learned and what I've taken away. And the book, it gives you this like feeling of like peace within, because it talks about how just what we were saying earlier about like the wild concept it is to be alive. Yeah. And how we're so small, so everything matters because nothing matters.
Yeah.
And it really did make me put things into perspective, and it makes me want to just find the beauty in things that maybe I wouldn't necessarily find the beauty in. I do want to ask, because we live in a generation and a world that's so, we want like instant satisfaction with social media. Along the process of writing the book, did you ever get frustrated with the time that it was taking?
Yeah, it took me a lot longer than I thought it was going to. I was like, I'm gonna write the whole thing in 10 days. That
Are you
didn't
serious?
happen. Yeah. I mean, I was at the beginning, I was averaging like 20 pages a day. So if I would have kept going at that speed, I definitely would have made it. I think it was a little longer than that. And then I took a couple months away from it and just kind of like made sure that the stories were feeling like they were still true to the characters. I just fell so deeply in love with the world and with the characters that like it was an honor to keep hanging out with them. Like I miss them sometimes, which is
Wow.
so weird. They became such like full realized. I mean, I've been living with them for so long. I swear, like my friends and my mom and people, like they'll mention them in the conversation, and I'm like, if someone else was listening, it sounds like we're talking about like a person, and that is so weird to think about. They're like, oh yeah, well Seven said something like, and I was like, yeah, he did. And so
Wow.
I think, you know, just being with them for so long, it kind of felt like we were hanging out. So like in a way, I just felt like I was living and then thinking about them while I was living, and then kind of capturing those thoughts or those things that I was, you know, experiencing with them in mind. I remember like I was on the script team of another movie, and we had an ending, but it didn't feel very strong. And I was like, I'm going to go for a drive. And I went for a drive, and I witnessed a car accident during the drive. And I was like, that's the end. And it was like just living with like the characters of the story in mind. I found so much inspiration from the real world around me. And I think I did that with this book as well. I just would like meet people and have conversations with people. And it was so many like late night overthinking crises that like led me here, and like a lot of TikTok poetry led me here, and like all of these things that just I was experiencing as myself with these characters in the back of my head. And I kind of knew, oh, that's something Lucy would do, or oh, that's something Seven would do, or oh, that reminds me of Ethan or Kaisen. And so they became my friends in a way, and I just thought of them in different moments. And so it took a lot longer than I thought, but not because I was stuck writing, but because I just wanted to live in between the writing and make sure I was getting accidental pieces from the real world as well.
Yeah. What is the hope with the book?
Oh gosh. I hope it just finds an audience that feels like it understands them in a way. That's my goal for like all of my writing. I think for me growing up, I remember whenever I would watch something or read something that I was just like, that's how I'm feeling, or that's what I was thinking, and I didn't know how to put it in words. And I have felt that way a lot with like different people I look up to. I think like Hank Green and John Green, obviously, and you know, like Greta Gerwig does that a lot too. And I think there's just like these people who are able to write the human experience in a way where people just see themselves in these characters. And we've kind of been saying that throughout. Is my hope is that when people read it, they're just like, that's how I felt, and I didn't know how to put it into words. So I hope it just finds the right audience and people like it, and the right people are like, this is meant for me.
I think that's the power of art though, right? In any form. As a consumer of it, you feel understood. That's the magic of it.
I go back and forth in a lot of my work because, you know, a lot of my work surrounds what I've been through, especially like my nonfiction stuff surrounds different like stories of families who have been through health events. And it's kind of always finding this balance of like, oh my gosh, that's me on screen, and like I've never been through that, but I feel like I'm in their shoes. And so I think trying to find that mix between the two is like a really special place. And if you can do it right, I think it's a lot easier for people to see themselves in those characters' shoes, even if they've never been through the thing that the character is experiencing. And that's kind of something I have to balance a lot in the brain tumor community, is like, even if you've never had a brain tumor, how can we get you to feel like you've experienced what we've experienced, but then also see yourself in these families and in this experience? So I think that was something I was thinking about a lot when writing this book, is like, how can people see themselves in the book and feel understood and feel heard, but also be experiencing something that they personally haven't experienced before.
Could there be a sequel?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's kind of, if you look in the end of the book, there's I don't know if it was in your copy or not, but there's like a bunch of little like mementos
Yeah.
that kind of nod to their future. And, I have this dream that they go off to New York and they all are roommates and stuff like that. There's like a lease in there for New York. And so I have hopes for them and I have dreams for them. I don't know. I think now that Lucy's gone, I don't know how much life or how much of the message he can continue betraying. Maybe he loses his memories all over again. It's happened before, you guys.
Maybe I have an idea. Maybe like somebody else loses his memories and then he's their Lucy.
There you go, Julia. Well, Julia and Grace Wethor coming 2025.
So you were pretty dead set on the idea that Lucy was gonna die at the end.
Yeah, people went back and forth with it for a while.
I did not see that coming. Just
Yeah, there was conversation about it being unnecessary, but it just felt like it needed to be final. It felt really full circle in a way. Also playing with this idea of death and then knowing that things continue on. I'm realizing so much of this is like tied to like what I've been through, but like in my community, death is such a complicated thing because usually kids are in a lot of pain towards the end of life. And so death is often like celebrated in a weird way in the cancer community. It felt very final in a way that I didn't think her living could. And also this idea of her kind of taking the place for the two of them. And then, of course, obviously, her having to get hurt in order for that scene to be recreated from the beginning so Seven could get his memories back and have that thing that triggered his memories returning. So I always knew that the car accident situation was going to happen, but it was like kind of how can we strengthen her why and how can we have her die because of what she's been through, even if we haven't seen it throughout the entire book. So yeah, we went back and forth on it a little bit with the people who were reading it as my test readers. But I kind of convinced them all that this was the right way to go.
I hear what you're saying about it just needed to like have that closure. I loved all the photos at the end. Like,
oh, good.
So creative and just, oh my God, it's brilliant. Okay. And the photos of you, I was like, well, she's Lucy, we know.
I was not sure I was gonna leave those in there.
So I think you totally should. And as she gave in to her random misfortune and carefully crafted the last memory she ever had, she granted me all of mine.
Yeah, just that part.
Oh, I don't even want to say the last line because I think you have to like read the book to. Actually, no, let's read it because then I want to know kind of like the meaning behind it.
Maybe I'll just read this last little chunk.
Okay.
A paramedic suddenly rips me from my star, breaking me out of my brain. I look down, she looks to me. She knows that her secret has been drenched in memory. Because, like she told me before, multiple people living one experience is what makes it real and makes it true. And until this moment, she's just been a liar. Until now. I see her truth, and that's enough comfort for her to let go. As the watery lines of the ambulance lights dash across her cheek, her eyes drift shut with unparalleled grace, and she takes the peace that we came to this very bridge to find just months earlier. I stand over her as they perform CPR. For the slightest second, I do a double take as her body morphs into mine. I've been here before. I've seen this before. I don't know if I'm imagining it, but I swear I see a smile spread across her face, as bright as the sun in the middle of the night, as her soul turns to smithereens. And as she gave in to her random misfortune and carefully crafted the last memory she ever had, she granted me all of mine. Thank you for being my star. Thank you for blowing up my world.
Chills, full body chills. Did that line, like that ending, just come to you? That was like a first draft.
Those last two sentences, those were not in there. I actually also went back and forth with getting rid of those. The whole, and as she carefully crafted the last memory she ever had, she granted me all of mine. That was originally the ending. That was the ending since draft one. I actually think I wrote that sentence, like that was probably one of the first things I wrote once I knew that this was how it was going to end. But the star and the astronomer concept kind of just like came into the book in a way that I didn't know it was going to. And as I was reading back through it, it felt like it was very prevalent. And kind of this concept of the universe and galaxies. I actually have a necklace. You cannot see it, but it has little stars all over it. And it says, if you think galaxies are amazing, wait until you hear about you, which is kind of a line that is repeated throughout the book.
You like came up with that line?
Yeah. It just came. Well, kind of this idea of like, we keep going back to this whole concept of like the world is so big, but then it's even more insane that we exist. I think there's like facts in there, and I don't want to totally butcher them, but it's like there's more bacteria in your body than ever existed stars in like history times 1,000 or some insane stat. And like it took so much, I think the words are like, it took so much luck to make you. You are so rare. Like the idea that we even exist is a miracle in itself. And it took so much for like us to literally be alive. And so I think we forget that because then we have to like go to school and go to work. And there's a balance too, obviously. But just realizing that the fact that we exist was completely coincidental and insane that we're here in the first place. So we might as well try to celebrate that where we can.
That was truly my biggest takeaway reading it. And like we talked about with like Lady Bird, I think it beautifully celebrates just the fact that you're alive, right? Like you don't need to prove yourself or achieve any sort of anything to earn your worth.
Yeah.
And the way that he views Lucy, who isn't a person that has done anything crazy, right? Do you ever read it as like a viewer, or you can only read it as the author?
I've read this book too many times. I hope I can come back to it, because that's like, for me, at the end of the day, that's what it was, is I just wanted to honor the words that like came out of my brain in a way. Like I always hoped that I would be the biggest fan of it. And I think I am. I've been reading it for grammar, so I'm reading it like word by word. So it's not like fun read right now. Yeah. But yeah, I hope I can read it in the future just as myself and not be like, what were you thinking? I hope everybody finds a piece of something in there that they can take into the world.
Because this is your first fiction novel out in the world.
Yeah.
Is it scary? Does it feel vulnerable?
Not completely, because I think obviously these characters aren't me and they're going through things that I've never been through. But yeah, I think there's so much of me in there that you wouldn't know is me, like references to songs and places that I've been, and little things that, you can only write what you know. And so you're using words that you're using locations that you're using feelings that you felt. You can only describe what you can imagine, right. I had written another book during quarantine that was also fiction, and it's like there was so much of my childhood that crept in, from like the names of the streets and like all these little things. Like you only know what you know. And so whether I want it to be revealing of my brain or not, it's words that I think of, it's places that I think of. So yeah, I think there's so much of me in there in a way, but I also hope people can remove me from that and feel as if the world is like its complete own thing, separate from my thoughts and my perspective of it. Because that was the other hard thing, is like when I started writing fiction, is like we want to push our values or thoughts or perspectives or what we would do onto characters, because that's what we would do. And so it took a long time, and I think it's an exercise that I'll have to practice forever, is like, that's what I would do, but that's not what they would do. And so making sure that characters have their own thoughts and their own opinions and their own things that they would do is like a lifelong lesson in a way. So yeah, they're everything I am and everything I'm not at the same time. For me, like I was saying, it was like going out and living and then coming back to it. I wrote so many songs.
Really?
Yeah. I was picking up my guitar like every day while I was writing, pretty much. And I think I have like at least 10 songs that I've written kind of from the perspective of different characters.
You songwrite.
Yeah. I mean, just for myself. Yeah, no, I was playing guitar pretty much every day when I was writing. And whenever I got sick of typing, I would go play guitar and then just sing, and something would come from that. And there's a lot of little words that ended up in the book that are some kind of, obviously I had to make them not rhyme, so it wasn't obvious, but there's pieces of songs that I've written kind of throughout the book as well. Wow. Kind of just singing from the perspective of the different characters. Yeah.
Where did you do most of your writing? At home?
All over. I moved right before I started the book, and so yeah, I did a lot of it in my house, but literally everywhere. On planes, different countries, different states, hotel rooms, everywhere. I wrote everywhere, and it helped a lot. I went on trips between writing. I was in different cities. I was with different people. And there's pieces of all of that in there. I would just kind of leave it. I was working on other projects too. So I was like, I would go film in the desert for like 4 days, rolling around in the dirt, like doing like parkour for a film and then be thinking about Ethan's story while I'm out there. And, for me, that was so helpful to be able to like move and experience different things that weren't this world or weren't my life. And so I found a lot of inspiration through that, or just that time away. So yeah, I wrote kind of all over the world, actually.
That is really, really cool. And then obviously only you can know the influence that different people or different places had on the story and the characters.
Yeah.
Characters are so fully fleshed out. I also feel like they're people that I would talk about. You are a constant, even before I met you, when I just knew of you and knew of your story, but you're a constant reminder to me, and that's why I tell everybody I know about you of what it looks like to continue to show up and to commit to your creative endeavors, and then I get to enjoy the art that you create because you made the commitment and had the discipline to continue to show up.
It takes a lot of discipline to do this in the first place. And for me, it was constantly about honoring the stories and the voices, whether those were real characters in like the real world that I had experienced, and I was kind of felt like I was capturing their perspective of their opinion of the world, or whether it was these characters that were completely made up. I still felt a responsibility to them and to honoring the story and honoring the world. And so that's one piece of it. But for me, it was truly what kept me going forward is I knew how much so many words had helped me. There were words that got me through places that I didn't know what I was going to do. And reading the right thing or hearing the right thing at the right time was just like, this is changing my entire world right now, as dramatic as that may sound. And I felt that a lot with books I'd read and YouTube videos I would watch in the middle of the night when I was sick, when I was younger. And so this hope that someone out there may be able to read one sentence of my book that could help them in some way, whether they felt like they were relating to the characters or not, that was like, this is why I need to put it out. There's a lot of things I've written just because I felt like I needed to write the story, and a lot of it was brain tumor related, and those books aren't out yet. And there's a reason that this book was the one that I felt like could reach the widest audience in that way and hopefully relate to the most amount of people as possible. I guess it goes back to kind of where we started, of this idea of like giving stories versus collecting them for your own. How can we give art to the world that will hopefully impact others and help others in different ways? And if we can give stories and give words or give art to the world and help just one person, I think that's making the world a better place. So for me, it was, in the beginning, it was this responsibility towards the characters, but what really in the end kept me going was the idea that I could hopefully just help or impact one person. So if you have something you feel like you want to say or something you want to show or do for the world, just think about all the stories and all of the joy you can be giving to others, and it becomes a responsibility. They become a piece of the project. They become a character in the project. So as much as I was thinking about what was in the book, it was about the people that would be impacted by the book as well.
Well, that is the most perfect way to end this conversation, Grace.
I don't want it to end.
I know you'll have to come back for part 3. We'll do part 3 when the sequel comes out, or
Sounds
when the
good. You're going to be writing it with me, though, so we'll have to be on someone else's podcast together.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for just being you and everything you do. I am constantly just inspired by you, and, your biggest fan, but we already know that.
And thank you for reading it. You're like I think you're the first person who wasn't on like my editing team to read the book.
Really? So was it interesting hearing what I felt the themes were?
Yes. That was magical, Julia. Hearing like,
really?
Yes.
Was it pretty aligned to what you felt?
Nailed it.
Oh, good. Well, you nailed it. That means you nailed it, not me.
Thank you for understanding my words.
Where can everyone go get the book? Amazon,
Barnes and Noble, some independent retailers. It'll list all of them everywhere, but Amazon's probably the fastest way if you want to get it in your hands now.
Okay, and then Grace will continue to post updates on social media, right, about the book and hopefully book signings. I'll be there.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be back.